Good.
Sorry, but maybe
Всем хватает
something
наушников.
wrong with the camera. So maybe we will start.
I can. Okay.
Okay, let's start. So
Okay, let's start.
Если кому-то не хватает, пожалуйста.
Okay, so can I start now? It's okay?
yes, yes.
Okay. Okay. So good afternoon for you. It's lunchtime for me here in Brazil. My name is Wagner Luiz Schmit. I am a psychologist and a PhD in psychology at the University of Cuba, Japan, and doing research here in Brazil now. So my speech will be about developmental, emotional, cognitive experiences and role-playing games. Or, I am not Russian, I don't speak Russian, but in other words, I can say that it's about переживания and role-playing games and LARP. And I will explain later why I use переживания. So this is based on a paper of mine called Perspectives and the Study of Role-Playing Games that is already published. So if anybody wants to have the paper, can contact the organization and have my email, then I can send the paper, it's okay. And before I start the speech, I must clarify what I'm talking about RPG, what I'm calling RPG here. So in this paper, I call two things role-playing games. Tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and Mage the Ascension and other games. And LARP, live-action role-playing games. But after the study was published, I discovered that the story of those games, although they are very close to each other, they are not exactly the same. And the games, they have more or less the same community, but they are not the same game. So I'm still working on how to work this divide, but in this speech, when I talk about role-playing games, I will be talking about both tabletop role-playing games and LARP. So, why переживания? Why I use this Russian word? And I try to translate it to developmental, emotional, cognitive experiences. So, as a psychologist, I use the work of a Russian psychologist called Lev Vygotsky to try to understand LARP and try to understand role-playing games. And this Russian psychologist that lived in the early 20th century, he thinks that he played LARP also. And his works on theater are very popular, are very easy to find. And for quite some time I heard that he improvisational theater. And so it's very interesting. Maybe he knows something about what we call today as LARP. So Vygotsky defines переживания, or these developmental, emotional, cognitive experiences, as two things. I am talking it funny or something? Is it wrong? I don't know.
It's okay. I like your переживания.
Thank you. So he calls it as a phenomenon. So переживание is a phenomenon. That is as Russian-speaking people use in their language, usually in their day-to-day. And it's both the process and the content of experiencing something. We have it in Portuguese also as vivência, but in English it's very difficult to translate because we don't have this concept in English. theoretical concept. This theoretical concept is divided in three parts. So, for Vygotsky, the object of psychology was consciousness. And he says that переживание is the functional unit of consciousness. He does not clarify what he means by consciousness, and that is troublesome and generates lots of debate on academia. But what is interesting for us that study LARP and play LARP are the other two approaches to this concept of perspective as a prism that refracts, the social environment and the unity of personality and environment. So it's something that, for example, when we experience something, is not only the environment that affects us, but also our personal story of development affects how we perceive and how we give meaning to what is happening to us. So this is why it's both a reflection of the social environment and the unity of personality, of our history of development and the social environment. I will get to LARP, don't worry. So, before talking about LARP and переживание, this developmental, emotional, cognitive experience, I need to talk also about performance. There is an American psychologist called Louise Holzman, and that she defines performance not based on achievement, but as in theater play, as representing something, as a representation of something. So she says that when we are performing, we are who we are and we are not at the same time. And here we are already approaching LARP and tabletop role-playing games. So this is the theoretical background that I am trying to use to understand how people experience those games. There is also another lecture from McDonald in 2012 for the Nordic LARP Talks, and he does a very interesting differentiation between two kinds of aesthetics that are related to the переживание and that are related to the LARP. One is the stage aesthetic, where the person presents something to others and we see the art coming from the performance of another person. So, for example, in a theater play, you have the actors and you have the audience. But you also have the immersive aesthetic, the lived aesthetic, where you experience something. So the actor and the audience are the same at the same time. This is what happens in LARP. So McDonald will say that although a LARP is not beautiful to see, it's beautiful to feel, it's beautiful to live it. And the concept of perspective from Vygotsky helps us to understand why this happens. Because one thing is to be in a theater watching a play, and the other thing is to be in maybe even the same theater, but as an actor, and even more different as a LARP player. Because this unity of personality and environment and the relationships will be different, so the experience will be different. this is interesting because many people ask me, oh, can I learn to play LARP or can I learn to play tabletop role-playing games? And I say, just play. And they say, oh, can I just watch it before I play? And I say no, because part of the game is the experience of the game. You cannot understand the game without playing it. Some RPG scholars will even say that you cannot do proper RPG research without playing RPG, because you will not get the full understanding of the phenomena. But this is controversial. So, now that we have this kind of theoretical background, we can approach LARP and how this happens in LARP. So, some players will say that sometimes they feel strong emotions or strong feelings, good and bad, and that sometimes their thoughts and the thoughts of the character will mingle with each other. We call this immersion. So as an example of what immersion is, I will read a little part of my paper. In an interview that I done with a game master, he said the following: some players put themselves in the situation as if they were there. They end up being themselves, but in that situation, they feel it more than just solving a problem. They feel the weight of taking a decision. It gets close to the player despite the fact that the reality of the character and of the player to be totally different. So, of course, we have debates about immersion in the game studies, but it's not clear yet the definition of what exactly immersion is. If you get 10 scholars of game studies together and ask each of them what exactly immersion is, each of them will give you a different definition. So we're still working on it. But since 2000 and, let me get the date, 2007, we have a debate among some LARP scholars about a specific kind of immersion that we call bleed. What is bleed? Bleed is when the feelings and the thoughts of the character or the player mix with each other. So we have a kind of bleed when the thoughts and feelings and experiences of the player affects the character, affects the role play, and the opposite. When the feelings and thoughts of the character, what was supposed to be the character, affects the player. So this is the bleed in and the bleed out. As an example, another example from my paper of this bleed, I was doing an interview with a tabletop RPG player and asked her for an example of a memorable game session, and she said, a member of the party died, was a paladin, and we had a lot of affection for him. Some players cried, one player left the room asking for some time for himself. But there was nothing we could do to save him, the paladin, because he was poisoned. I felt the tears falling through my face, and I was sad as if it was I and not my character that lost a friend. So, of course, this separation that I do between the player and the character is just a research approach. I know that there is not a metaphysical realm where the characters are alive or something like that. But it's interesting to notice how the player, when he is really immersive, he can have these experiences, and how these experiences changes the player sometimes for life. So we have, I have in my research some data pointing that people changed their behavior. So there was a change in their personality and their historical development because of the playing some certain games over time. It took some time. It's still a research question if we can change a player's point of view of the world with just one session. But with a campaign, so with a number of serious games, we can have this. As a preliminary results, so this is not in the paper yet, this is not in any formal report yet. I noticed some patterns on what causes these phenomena, these perishivani, and these experiences. So, one is critical moral struggles. So when the player or the character or both have to make a very serious decision, this can put them in a very, if they are really immersive, they can feel the emotions of the character can affect the players and vice versa. Death of a player character or of a non-player character, this also. And of course, in cases of bleed. Most of the time is in the case of bleed, when the player is so immersive that there is this mix between player and character. One interesting thing, though, is that the player can be totally immersed in the game, but still have no bleed. The opposite does not happen yet. I did not notice if it's possible to have bleed without the immersion. I don't think so. But as a scientist, I cannot take any conclusions yet. So, in the end, my question as a researcher, as a LARP researcher and a psychologist is that, can we design games for people to have these developmental, emotional, cognitive experiences with LARPs and TRPGs? For the time, the answer is clearly yes. It seems so. And the second question that I want to answer with more research is, can we use these as tools in schools to promote emotional development, since the players will use the character as a buffer to emotions and thoughts and have debates with the educator in order to have a better understanding of himself and of others. So I leave this question open for you. And since we have still 10 minutes, I thought more of a conversation, and I am open to questions. Sorry if it was, it is a very broad theme, so it's too much to make this compact in just half an hour. so maybe it was a bit confusing. My thesis is 80 pages long, and my paper is 20 pages long, so make this very, very simple is complicated. But I hope that I could make you at least a bit interested in this phenomena of how people can feel new stuff, different stuff, in these games and why. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Возможно, у кого-то есть вопросы?
Это уже все?
So we have one question. What psychological methods do you use for the living the game, for the living the game, of the life? Without
Дебрифинг.
Безболезненного психологического.
What methods do you use
Вот
for
проболеть, что надо почувствовать.
harmless
Вот он
living the game
Когда-
for players? Psychological
Oh.
living the game. But how?
Okay, this is an interesting question. This is a very, very interesting question. I myself, in my research, what we do is debate, but this is not common practice. So, and even among the players and the playing community, this is of serious debate. As a psychologist, of course, I am concerned with the psychological safety of the players. So in my research, I made myself available. If any of the players feel any discomfort, they can look after me. They can look after me to a private conversation. But following the works of another psychologist, an American psychologist called Sarah Bowman, what I experienced as the most simple tool that makes these games a lot more safer is to have a conversation before the game. So make clear what the game is about and make a kind of contract with the players of what is going to happen, and having a debate after the game. So to talk about how people experience the games and how people felt the emotions, the thoughts, and make a separation between the person and the character. So another simple tool is, during the debate, to avoid talking in the first person when talking about the character. Talk in the third person. So, for example, my character was John. Instead of saying, oh, I felt really bad when Veronica, another character, had a fight with me. It's better to say, oh, John felt bad when Veronica had a fight with him. This starts to put some distance between the player and the character, but it's still not 100% clear that it will be totally safe.
So thank you for your answer.
Еще можно вопрос? Я могу сама.
Hello, I have one question for you. I'm a psychologist.
Yes.
Yes, I'm a psychologist as well. I heard about emotional and cognition development of your participants. Do you have some methods to measure this development or to fix it to, I don't know, like classic knowledge or something?
Okay, this is the tricky part. So I don't apply any tests. I think tests are a little bit complicated to evaluate, especially in the gaming scenario. It would totally break the setting. What I do is to do a qualitative analysis of the changes over time. So I am recording the sessions. I recorded the whole gaming session. And after the game session, I asked the players what was the most relevant, the most exciting, or the most the part of the game that most affected you. And they talk about this. And in my analysis of each session, I pick the parts of the game that they pointed out and make an analysis of it. Then I have this chance of many game sessions. What I am doing now is comparing what is different from each session. So when I say developmental, it's not straightforward, okay? For Vygotsky, the development can be forward, can be backward, can be a rupture. So it's a case to case. Another thing that I had to do in order to make this evaluation, I made a big questionnaire with lots of descriptive questions also, so not just objective answers about the player's personal history and the player's personal history of gaming. So I will intercalate this analysis of the questionnaires with the analysis of the games. I hope I answered your question. I don't know if you were expecting this.
Yes, it was good answer. Yes, I like it.
Welcome.
So thank you very much for your lecture. Maybe applause.
Thank you very much. Bye bye. Have a good conference.
Thank you.
Вот я тоже про кепку-то.
А потом подумал, вдруг у него проблемы там какие-то.
Но у него с утоплением, наверное.
Я
Это же
подумала,
Бразилия.
может, после операции. А
Он
потом
просто
идти.
лысый.